The afternoon sun hung heavy over the city courthouse, turning the white marble steps into a stage of gold and shadow. Expensive cars lined the street. Photographers crowded behind metal barriers. Armed security stood at every corner, hands ready, eyes sharp. Luca DeSantis walked through the tall courthouse doors like a man who owned the world. His black suit was perfectly tailored. His dark hair was combed back. His gray eyes swept the crowd without emotion, the way a king might glance at his subjects. He was 34 years old and controlled half the city's ports. People whispered his name with fear and respect in equal measure. When Luca DeSantis made a decision, entire businesses rose or fell overnight. When he spoke, powerful men listened. When he walked, crowds parted like water before a ship. 6 armed guards surrounded him now, forming a tight circle of muscle and weapons. Marco Vale, his most trusted lieutenant, walked half a step behind on his right. Marco was built like a bear, with scarred knuckles and eyes that never stopped watching for danger. The armored convoy waited at the bottom of the steps. 3 black SUVs with bulletproof glass and reinforced steel. The middle vehicle was Luca's. The door stood open. A driver stood ready. Everything was planned down to the second. Everything was controlled. Everything was safe. Or so they thought. Luca descended the marble steps with steady, measured footfalls. His expensive leather shoes clicked against stone. The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. Security shifted, creating a clear path to the waiting vehicle. He was 3 steps from the car when she appeared. A little girl stepped directly into his path. She was small, maybe 8 years old, with dark curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind you wash by hand because you cannot afford new ones. Her sneakers had holes near the toes. Her jacket was too big, probably handed down or bought secondhand. But it was her eyes that made Luca stop. Those eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held something that did not belong on a child's face. Not fear, not innocence, something older, something that had seen too much and learned lessons the hard way. The crowd gasped. Guards moved instantly, hands reaching for weapons. Red laser dots appeared on the girl's small chest as snipers from nearby rooftops locked on target. Get down, Marco roared, stepping forward with his gun drawn. Get away from him now. The girl did not move. She did not flinch. She did not even blink. She just stood there, blocking Luca's path, her small body planted between him and the open car door like a human barricade. Time seemed to slow down. The afternoon sounds faded into a muffled hum. All Luca could hear was his own heartbeat and the soft breathing of the child in front of him. Every instinct told him to move. Every rule of survival said this was a threat. Children could carry bombs. Small bodies could hide weapons. Innocence could be a disguise. Marco was already moving to grab the girl. 3 other guards converged from different angles. In seconds, she would be tackled to the ground, searched, possibly shot if she made the wrong move. But something made Luca raise his hand. Just one hand, lifted palm out toward his men. A simple gesture that said, "Stop. Wait." The guards froze mid-step. Marco's face twisted with confusion and frustration, but he obeyed. 25 years of loyalty meant he trusted Luca's instincts, even when they made no sense. The crowd held its breath. Photographers stopped shooting. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was waiting to see what happened next. Luca looked down at the girl. She looked up at him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the child said, in a voice far too calm for someone surrounded by guns, "If you get in that car, you'll be dead in 3 minutes." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Luca's eyes narrowed. Around him, his guards tensed. Marco made a sound low in his throat, part growl, part warning. "Sir," Marco said urgently, "we need to remove her. Now." But Luca held up his hand again. His gray eyes never left the girl's face. "How does a child know what will happen to my car?" His voice was low, controlled, dangerous in its quietness. The girl did not look away. Most adults could not hold Luca's gaze for more than a few seconds. His eyes were too cold, too calculating, like staring into winter itself. But this 8-year-old child looked straight at him without fear. "Because," she said, her small voice carrying clearly in the strange silence, "it already happened to my dad." The crowd erupted. Whispers turned to shouts. Guards moved, not knowing whether to protect Luca or grab the girl. Marco swore and reached for his phone, already calling for a security sweep of all 3 vehicles. But Luca stood perfectly still. Something in those 4 words had struck a chord deep in his chest. A chord that had not been touched in years. It already happened to my dad. He knew that tone. He recognized that particular kind of pain. It was the sound of a child who had watched someone they loved die and could do nothing to stop it. He had made that same sound once, a long time ago. "What's your name?" Luca asked. His voice had changed. Not soft, exactly, but less sharp. Less like a blade. The girl tilted her head slightly. "Elia, Elia," he repeated. Then, "Where is your mother?" For the first time, a crack appeared in the girl's composure. Her eyes flicked to the side, toward the crowd barrier. Following her gaze, Luca saw a woman pushing through the mass of bodies, panic written across her face. The woman was young, maybe 30, with the same dark curly hair as the girl. Her face was pale with fear. She wore scrubs under a light jacket, the kind nurses or medical assistants wore. As she ran, she kept one hand pressed to her side, as if holding a stitch from running too hard. "Elia!" the woman cried out. "Elia, get back here!" But before she could reach them, Marco and 2 other guards blocked her path, weapons raised. "Let her through," Luca said quietly. The guards hesitated. This went against every protocol. But Luca's voice carried absolute authority, even in a whisper. They stepped aside. The woman rushed to Elia and immediately placed herself between her daughter and Luca. Her arms spread wide, her body a shield, even though she was trembling so hard her hands shook. "Please," she gasped, out of breath. "Please don't hurt her. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's confused. I'm so sorry. Please, what's your name?" Luca interrupted. The woman blinked, thrown off by the question. Sofia. Sofia Romano." Luca nodded once. Then he did something that made Marco and every guard around him freeze in disbelief. He stepped back, not away from danger, toward it. He moved closer to Elia and Sofia, close enough that if they had weapons, they could strike. And then he spoke, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Bring them to the estate. Both of them. Under protection, not arrest." The Moretti estate sat on 20 acres of land on the edge of the city, surrounded by high stone walls and cameras that never stopped watching. The main house was old money, built in another century when people measured wealth in land and legacy instead of stock portfolios. Luca stood in his study on the 2nd floor, watching through bulletproof glass as Marco's team finished sweeping all 3 vehicles from the courthouse convoy. His phone buzzed. He answered without looking at the screen. "Talk," he said. Marco's voice came through, tight with anger barely held in check. "You were right to listen to the kid. They found a bomb in the middle vehicle. Pressure trigger under your seat. The moment you sat down, 3-minute timer. When you got out at the estate, boom." Luca's jaw tightened. "Detonation method? Remote backup in case you didn't sit. Professional work. Military-grade explosive. Whoever planted this knew exactly what they were doing. Where is the convoy planner?" A pause. Then Marco said, "Gone. Apartment cleaned out. Security footage from his building shows him leaving 3 hours ago with 2 suitcases. We're tracking him now." "Don't bother," Luca said coldly. "He's already dead. They don't leave loose ends. Then we need to know who they is. And we need to know why an 8-year-old girl knew about it." Luca glanced at the closed door of the study. Beyond it, 2 floors down, Sofia and Elia were being given rooms in the guest wing. Guards stood at every door and hallway. "Bring the girl and her mother to my office," Luca said. "It's time to hear the whole story." He hung up and walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him, gray eyes dark with thought. 20 years in this world had taught him to trust no one. 20 years of betrayal and blood had turned his heart to stone. He had learned early that mercy was weakness and compassion was a luxury that got good men killed. But something about that little girl blocking his path had shaken something loose inside him. Something he thought he had buried the day his mother died in his arms while he was too young and too powerless to help. It already happened to my dad. He knew that feeling. God, did he know it? Sofia Romano sat stiffly on the edge of an expensive leather chair, one arm wrapped protectively around Elia. The girl leaned against her mother's side, unnaturally quiet now that the adrenaline had worn off. The study was massive, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, dark wood paneling, and a desk that looked older than Sofia herself. Everything in the room spoke of power and money and control. Luca sat behind the desk, watching them. Marco stood by the door, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You said the same thing happened to your father," Luca said, speaking directly to Elia. "Tell me what you mean." Elia looked up at her mother. Sophia's face was pale, but she gave a tiny nod. The girl turned to Luca. When she spoke, her voice was matter of fact, the way children sometimes are when talking about terrible things. 6 months ago, my dad got into his car to go to work. I was watching from the window because I always waved goodbye. He started the engine and the car exploded. The whole thing just went up in fire. Sophia's arm tightened around her daughter. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. As if she had cried so much already that she had none left. "The police said it was an accident," Sophia added, her voice hollow. "A gas leak, bad wiring. They never found who did it. They never even really looked." "What did your husband do for work?" Luca asked. Sophia hesitated. Then, quietly, "He was an accountant. Offshore accounts, international transfers. He worked for different companies, handled their books, moved their money legally." "What companies?" "I don't know all of them. He didn't talk about work much. Said it was boring, all numbers and paperwork." She paused. "But about 3 months before he died, he started acting different. Nervous. He wouldn't sleep. He kept checking the locks on the doors. And he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would take Elia and disappear. Not to the police. Not to anyone. Just disappear." Luca's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Why didn't you?" "Because I'm a medical assistant at a community clinic," Sophia said, and for the first time there was fire in her voice. "I make barely enough to pay rent. I don't have family to run to. My parents are dead. I have nowhere to go and no money to get there. When Marco died, I had to keep working just to keep a roof over our heads." "Your husband's name was Marco?" Luca's lieutenant spoke up from the door. Sophia nodded. "Marco Romano." Marco Vale exchanged a look with Luca. A look that said, "I'll run the name. See what comes up." Elia spoke again, her young voice cutting through the tension. "Mama doesn't know, but I heard things. Before Dad died." Sophia turned sharply. "What things?" "Elia, why didn't you?" "Because you were already so scared," Elia said simply. "And I thought if I didn't say anything, maybe it would all go away." The pain on Sophia's face was raw and immediate. Luca saw it and recognized it. The guilt of a parent who could not protect their child. The grief of realizing your child had been protecting you. "What did you hear?" Luca asked gently. It was perhaps the gentlest tone he had used in years. Elia closed her eyes, remembering. "Dad was on the phone late one night. I got up for water and heard him talking in his office. He was crying. I never heard him cry before. He said, 'I kept copies. Insurance. If anything happens to me, someone will find them. You can't silence everyone.'" The room went very quiet. Then, Elia continued, "He said a name. He said it 3 times. Angelo. Angelo Vitali." Marco's face went white. He took a step forward, hand dropping to his weapon on pure instinct. Luca's expression turned to stone. "That's impossible," Marco said flatly. "Angelo Vitali has been dead for 12 years. I was at his funeral. I helped carry the coffin." "Was there a body?" Luca asked, never taking his eyes off Elia. Marco opened his mouth, closed it. Then, slowly. "It was a closed casket. They said the accident had. They said there wasn't much left to see." Luca stood. His chair scraped against the floor. He walked to the window and stared out at the grounds, hands clasped behind his back. Angelo Vitali, his uncle, his father's right hand, the man who had taught Luca everything about this life. How to read people, how to spot lies, how to survive betrayal. The man who had supposedly died in a warehouse fire 12 years ago. The man Luca had never stopped dreaming about. Never stopped missing. "Mama," Elia whispered, "the man I saw at the courthouse today? The one touching the car before Mr. DeSantis came out?" Sophia's arms tightened. "What man, baby?" "The one with the snake ring. And the scars on his knuckles." Luca turned from the window. "Describe him." Elia spoke with the precise observation of a child who had learned to watch everything. "Tall. Taller than Mama but not as tall as you. Gray hair. Expensive suit, dark blue. He had a ring on his right hand. Gold snake eating its own tail. And his knuckles were all scarred up, like he punched things a lot." Marco pulled out his phone and swiped through photos quickly. He turned the screen toward Elia. "Is this him?" The girl studied the photo. It was an old picture, maybe 15 years old, showing a man in his 40s with dark hair and sharp features. Maybe, Elia said carefully. But older. And his hair was all gray now. But the eyes, yeah. Those eyes. Cold. Like looking at a snake. The photo was Angelo Vitali. Luca's uncle. His mentor. His betrayer, if Elia was right. If a dead man could come back to life. Keep them here, Luca said to Marco. Guest wing, second floor. Full protection. If Angelo is alive, then Sofia and Elia are witnesses to whatever he's been doing for the last 12 years. He'll come for them. Sir, Marco said carefully, maybe we should consider. Consider what? Luca's voice was cold again. Back to the ice that made people whisper about him. That we should eliminate the witness problem ourselves? Marco said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Luca crossed the room until he stood in front of Marco. They were nearly the same height, both dangerous men, both killers in their own right. This child, Luca said quietly, each word deliberate, saved my life today. While people on the inside were trying to blow me to pieces, an 8-year-old girl with nothing to gain risked her life to warn a stranger. You think I'm going to repay that by putting a bullet in her head? Marco met his eyes. After a moment, he nodded. No, sir. I don't. Good. Because from this moment, Sofia and Elia are under my personal protection. Anyone who touches them answers to me. He paused, let that sink in. And Marco? Start looking into Marco Romano's death. Find out what companies he worked for. Find out what he was hiding. Find out what Angelo doesn't want us to know. Marco nodded and left, phone already at his ear, barking orders. Luca turned back to Sofia and Elia. The woman looked exhausted, holding her daughter like the only solid thing in a world that had gone mad. The girl watched him with those two old eyes. Why are you helping us? Sofia asked. Her voice was soft but direct. Men like you don't help people like us without wanting something. It was a fair question. Smart, even. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he surprised himself by telling the truth. Because 26 years ago, I was 10 years old. I watched my mother get shot in front of me. She died because I was too young and too weak to save her. The man who killed her was someone my father trusted completely. Someone we loved. He met Sofia's eyes. I swore that day I would never be weak again. That I would never stand helpless while someone I cared about died. He looked down at Elia. Your daughter reminded me of that promise. She stood between me and death because she didn't want another child to lose a parent the way she lost hers. That's not something I take lightly. Elia spoke up, her small voice clear. Guns don't scare people who already lost everything. The adults in the room went still. Out of the mouths of children came truth so pure it cut like glass. That night, Sofia stood in the doorway of the bedroom they had been given, watching Elia sleep. The bed was larger than their entire apartment had been. The sheets were softer than anything Sofia had ever touched. Through the window, she could see gardens lit by warm golden lights, making the world outside look like something from a dream. But Sofia couldn't sleep. Every shadow made her jump. Every sound in the hallway made her heart race. She kept thinking about the bomb in Luca's car. About her husband burning alive in their driveway. About all the ways this could end badly. A soft knock on the doorframe made her turn. Luca stood there, still dressed in his suit despite the late hour. He held 2 cups of tea. Can't sleep? He asked. Sofia shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see Marco burning. And now I see Elia standing in front of you with guns pointed at her. I can't stop seeing it. Luca stepped into the room and offered her one of the cups. She took it, grateful for something to do with her shaking hands. She's braver than most soldiers I know, he said quietly, looking at the sleeping child. 8 years old and she walked into a Mafia boss's convoy without hesitation. Either she's incredibly brave or she doesn't value her own life anymore, Sofia finished, and her voice broke. After Marco died, she stopped talking for 3 weeks. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. I had to take her to a therapist, and the therapist said Elia blamed herself. She thought if she had warned her father about the bad feeling she had that morning, maybe he wouldn't have gotten in the car. Children blame themselves for things they cannot control, Luca said. It's easier than accepting the world as random and cruel. Sofia looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the expensive suit and the cold eyes and the reputation, she saw something familiar. The same wound her daughter carried. The same scar on the soul. Your mother, she said softly. How old were you when she died? 10. Did you blame yourself? Luca was silent for a long time. Then, every day, for years, I thought if I had been faster, smarter, stronger, if I had seen it coming, maybe I could have stopped it. And now? Now I'm strong enough to stop it. But the guilt never goes away. You just learn to carry it. They stood together in the quiet room, two people who understood loss in its rawest form. Outside, guards patrolled. Cameras watched. Somewhere in the night, a dead man was alive and planning his next move. But in this moment, in this room, there was only the shared silence of survivors. 3 days passed. Marco's investigation team worked around the clock, piecing together the life of Marco Romano, offshore accountant and Elia's father. What they found was explosive. Luca sat in his office, reading report after report, each one more damning than the last. Sofia and Elia were downstairs having breakfast, protected by 6 armed guards. They didn't know yet what Marco had discovered, but they would have to know soon. Marco Vale entered without knocking, carrying a thick folder and a grim expression. "Tell me," Luca said. Marco Romano worked for 7 different shell companies over the last 8 years. Every single one of them was owned by Angelo Vitali. Marco dropped the folder on the desk. "He was laundering money for your uncle the entire time. Hundreds of millions of dollars moved through offshore accounts. Weapons deals, drug operations, human trafficking routes." Luca's hands clenched. "And Romano kept records?" "Better than that. He kept everything. Every transaction, every account number, every deal. The man was building an insurance policy." Marco flipped open the folder to show bank statements, screenshots of encrypted messages, photos of meetings. He knew working for Angelo was a death sentence eventually. So he documented it all. And Sofia was right. 3 months before he died, he got sloppy. Made a mistake. And Angelo found out. So Angelo killed him. Yes. But here's the thing. We can't find the records. Romano told his wife he had insurance, but we've searched their apartment, his office, his car. Nothing. Whatever he was hiding, it's still hidden. Luca leaned back in his chair, thinking. If Sofia doesn't know where it is, and we can't find it, why would Angelo still be targeting them? Because maybe Elia knows. Maybe Romano told his daughter something. Kids are good at keeping secrets. Or maybe, Marco hesitated. Say it. Maybe Angelo just wants to tie up loose ends. Maybe it doesn't matter if they know anything. The fact that they're connected to Romano at all makes them a risk. Before Luca could respond, his phone buzzed. Security. Urgent. He answered. What? The guard's voice was tight. Sir, we found something. You need to see this. Luca found Elia in the library on the first floor. The room was enormous, filled with books from floor to ceiling. The girl sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by art supplies Sofia had requested for her. She was drawing. Sofia stood nearby, talking to one of the guards about something. She looked up when Luca entered, saw his face, and immediately tensed. What's wrong? She asked. Can I talk to Elia? Luca asked. Alone? Sofia's protective instincts flared immediately. No. Whatever you need to say, you say it in front of me. Luca nodded. Fair enough. He walked over and knelt down beside Elia, bringing himself to her eye level. Elia, he said gently, I need to ask you something important. About your dad. The girl's hand stilled on her drawing. She didn't look up. Before he died, did your father give you anything? Or tell you to remember something? Anything at all, even if it seems silly or small? Elia was quiet. Then, so softly Luca almost missed it, the stars. Sofia stepped closer. What stars, baby? Dad said if anything bad happened, I should remember the stars. That's where the truth lives. Where no one can reach it. Luca exchanged a glance with Marco, who had followed him into the room. Did he explain what that meant? Elia finally looked up. Her dark eyes were shiny with tears she was trying not to let fall. He took me to the planetarium. In the city. We went 3 times in 1 week. He said we were looking at Orion. The hunter. And he made me memorize numbers. He said they were Orion's coordinates. The exact position of the stars. What were the numbers? Marco asked, already pulling out his phone. Elia closed her eyes and recited perfectly. 53432 north. 53615 west. Marco typed rapidly. Waited. His face went pale. That's not Orion's coordinates, he said slowly. Those are GPS coordinates. To a storage facility on the west side of the city. Luca stood. His heart was pounding, though his face remained calm. How long has that storage unit been rented? Marco's fingers flew across his phone. It's under a fake name, but payment records show it's been active for 9 years. Paid in full through 2030. That's where Marco Romano hid his insurance, Luca said. That's what Angelo's been looking for. And then, because the universe has a terrible sense of timing, every light in the house went out. The backup generators should have kicked in immediately. They didn't. In the sudden darkness, Ilia's small voice said, "He's coming, isn't he?" Luca's training kicked in instantly. "Marco, get them to the panic room. Now." But Marco was already moving, grabbing Sofia with one hand and Ilia with the other. "Follow me. Stay low. Move fast." The panic room was 3 floors up, hidden behind a false wall in the master bedroom. It was designed to withstand a siege. Steel-reinforced walls, independent air supply, communications equipment, weapons. But they had to get there first. In the darkness, Luca could hear sounds. Glass breaking, doors being forced, the muffled sounds of guards shouting. Then gunfire. Quick, professional shots. Suppressors. Angelo's team was inside. Luca pulled his weapon and moved toward the library door. "Go. I'll cover you." Sofia's voice came from the darkness. "I'm not leaving you to. You're not leaving me to anything. I'm doing my job. Now go." Marco didn't wait for more argument. He pulled Sofia and Ilia into the hallway, using the emergency lights that lined the floor to navigate. Behind them, Luca stepped into the corridor. He counted heartbeats, controlled his breathing, and waited. 3 men appeared at the end of the hall, moving in tactical formation. Night vision goggles, body armor. They weren't here to take prisoners. Luca fired 3 times. 3 men dropped, but there would be more. There were always more. He moved quickly through the house, taking hallways he'd known since childhood. Secret passages built into the old architecture. His family had owned this land for 4 generations. He knew every hidden door, every blind corner, every advantage. He could hear Marco and the others on the stairs above. Almost to the 3rd floor. Almost safe. Then he heard Ilia scream. Luca ran. When he reached the 3rd floor landing, his heart dropped. Marco was down, bleeding from his shoulder but still moving. Sofia was pressed against the wall, shielding Ilia with her body. And standing in front of them, weapon raised, was a ghost. Angelo Vitali looked older than the photos. His hair was fully gray now. Deep lines carved his face. But his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who had stopped valuing human life a long time ago. "Hello, nephew," Angelo said calmly. "You've grown." Luca's gun was pointed at his uncle's head. Angelo's gun was pointed at Sofia and Ilia. Stalemate. "You were dead," Luca said, his voice empty of emotion. "I was patient. There's a difference." Angelo smiled, but it held no warmth. "Your father wanted to go legitimate. Wanted to wash away everything we built. He would have destroyed the empire. So I had to remove him. And then I had to disappear until the time was right to take back what's mine. You killed my mother. She was protecting your father. Collateral damage. I would have preferred to spare her, but she made that impossible." Luca felt rage rising in his chest like fire. "You were family. And family betrayed me first. I built the DeSantis empire. Me. Your father just inherited it and wanted to throw it all away. He deserved what he got." Behind Angelo, Ilia spoke up. Her small voice was steady. "My dad said people like you always think the world owes them something. That's how you know they're going to lose in the end." Angelo glanced at her, amused. "Smart child. Too bad she knows too much." "She knows where the records are," Luca said. "It was a gamble. A dangerous one. But sometimes you have to bet everything." Angelo's expression shifted. "The storage unit. Yes. I figured that out. I'll have my people there within the hour. You won't make it out of this house alive. Neither will she." Angelo's gun pressed harder against Sofia's temple. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to lower your weapon. You're going to let me walk out of here. And in exchange, I won't kill them. Tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow is tomorrow. Today, you get to keep them alive. Isn't that worth something?" Time slowed down. Luca could see every option playing out in his mind. He could take the shot. He was fast enough. Good enough. But Angelo was fast too, and at this range, even if Luca killed him, Angelo's finger might squeeze the trigger on instinct. Sofia and Ilia would die. Or he could lower his weapon. Let Angelo walk, give up the advantage, and hope he could find another way. But there was a third option. Luca met Elia's eyes, the little girl who had stopped him on the courthouse steps. The child who saw too much and understood even more. And in that moment, he saw something that made his decision. She wasn't scared. She was watching, calculating, waiting for something. "Okay," Luca said. "Okay, you win." He slowly began to lower his gun. Angelo smiled. Smart choice. But Luca wasn't lowering his gun all the way. Just enough. Just to shift Angelo's attention. Just for 1 second. And in that second, Elia moved. The 8-year-old girl did something so unexpected that even Angelo didn't see it coming. She twisted, grabbed a heavy book from the floor beside her, and slammed it upward with all her strength into Angelo's wrist. It wasn't much. A child's strength against a grown man. But it was enough to make his gun jerk upward, just a few inches, just long enough. Luca fired. The shot echoed through the hallway. Angelo fell, the gun clattering from his hand. He hit the floor and didn't move. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Sofia grabbed Elia and pulled her close, sobbing. Marco pushed himself up, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. And Luca walked forward slowly, weapon still raised, until he stood over his uncle's body. Angelo was still alive. Barely. Blood spread across his expensive suit. "You taught me," Luca said quietly, "that in this world, mercy is weakness. That family means nothing compared to power. That the only thing that matters is being on top." Angelo looked up at him. Tried to speak. Blood bubbled on his lips. "But you were wrong," Luca continued. "Family is everything. Power without it is just being alone in a cold house, waiting for someone to betray you the way you betrayed everyone else." Angelo's eyes dimmed, and then they went dark. Luca stood there for a moment longer. Then he turned to Elia, who was still clutching her mother, and said, "Thank you." For the second time, the little girl nodded. "You promised you'd keep us safe. Good people keep their promises." 3 weeks later, the storage facility on the west side revealed its secrets. Marco Romano had been thorough, meticulous, paranoid in the best possible way. Inside Unit 247 were hard drives, folders, photographs, account numbers, recordings. Everything Angelo Vitali had done for 15 years. Weapons deals with terrorist organizations. Money laundering for cartels. Human trafficking routes across 3 continents. And most damning of all, proof that Angelo had orchestrated the assassination of Luca's parents 26 years ago. The evidence was turned over to federal authorities. Not all of them. Luca knew better than to trust the system completely, but enough of them, the right ones, the ones who weren't on Angelo's payroll. Arrests were made. Accounts were frozen. An empire built on suffering began to crumble. And through it all, Sofia and Elia stayed at the estate. At first, it was just for protection. Until the danger passed. Until they could go home safely. But as days turned to weeks, something changed. The house that had been cold and empty for decades began to feel warm. Elia's laughter echoed through hallways that had known only silence. Sofia's presence softened edges that had been sharp for too long. And Luca, the man people said had ice for blood, began to thaw. One evening, Luca found Elia in the library again. She was drawing, as she often did. This time, she was working on something large, using an entire poster board. He walked over quietly. "What are you making?" Elia looked up and smiled. "A thank you. For letting us stay." She turned the poster so he could see. It was a house. The estate. Drawn with a child's imperfect hand but perfect heart. And in front of the house stood 3 people. A tall man with dark hair. A woman with kind eyes. And a little girl holding both their hands. At the top, in careful letters, Elia had written, "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who would die for you. And who you die for." Luca felt something crack inside his chest. Something he'd kept locked away for 26 years. Since the day he'd watched his mother fall and his uncle, his beloved uncle, walk away without a backward glance. He'd spent his whole life building walls, making himself cold, turning into the kind of man who couldn't be hurt because he didn't let anyone close enough to matter. But this little girl, with her old eyes and her brave heart, had walked right through every defense without even trying. "Can I keep this?" he asked, his voice rough. Elia nodded. "It's yours. We're all yours. If you'll have us." Sofia found him later that night, standing in the garden under stars that looked nothing like the GPS coordinates that had saved all their lives. "She's asking if we can stay," Sofia said softly. "Permanently." She said this is the first place she's felt safe since Marco died. Luca didn't answer immediately. He just stared up at the sky. "What do you want?" he finally asked. Sofia was quiet. Then, "I want Elia to have a childhood. I want her to sleep without nightmares. I want her to stop feeling like she has to save everyone because she couldn't save her father." She paused. "And I want to stop being so tired. So scared. So alone." "You won't be alone," Luca said. He turned to face her. "If you stay, I'll protect you both. Not just as guards or employees. As family." "Why?" Sofia asked. "Why would you do that for us?" "Because your daughter saw a stranger about to die and risked everything to warn him. Because you stood between her and guns without hesitation. Because in a world full of people who only care about themselves, you too cared about someone you didn't even know." He met her eyes. "That's rare. That's precious. That's worth protecting." Sofia stepped closer. Close enough that he could see tears shining in her eyes. "I've spent 6 months trying to survive," she said. "Maybe it's time to try living instead." Luca reached out and took her hand. It was small and warm and trembling slightly. "Then stay," he said. "Both of you. Stay." And Sofia, who had spent so long being strong alone, finally let herself lean on someone else. 6 months after that night, the estate was unrecognizable. The heavy curtains were gone, replaced with light fabric that let the sun stream in. Elia's drawings covered the walls, bright spots of color in rooms that had been gray for decades. Sofia had returned to nursing, but at a private practice that Luca funded for the community. She helped people who couldn't afford medical care, the way she'd once needed help. Marco Vale, recovered from his shoulder wound, had stopped suggesting they eliminate witnesses. Instead, he taught Elia chess on Sunday afternoons. And Luca, the man the city feared, the man who controlled half the ports and all the power, spent his evenings reading bedtime stories to an 8-year-old girl who had saved his life. One night, after Elia was asleep, Sofia found him in the study. He was looking at the drawing Elia had made months ago. The one with 3 people standing in front of the house. "She's asking if she can call you Dad," Sofia said quietly from the doorway. Luca's hand tightened on the frame. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was up to you." He set the picture down and turned to face her. "I've done terrible things, Sofia. I've hurt people, killed people. I'm not a good man." "Maybe not," Sofia agreed. "But you're a good father. And that's what she needs." Luca walked across the room to where Sofia stood. They'd been dancing around this for months. The connection, the pull, the way they fit together like pieces that had been searching for each other. "And what do you need?" he asked. Sofia reached up and touched his face. "I need to know this is real. That we're not just survivors clinging to each other. That this could be something." Instead of answering with words, Luca kissed her. Soft and gentle and full of all the hope he'd thought he'd lost 26 years ago. When they pulled apart, Sofia was crying. But this time, the tears were happy ones. 1 year after Elia blocked Luca's path on the courthouse steps, the 3 of them stood in front of a new building in the city's poorest neighborhood. It was a shelter. For families fleeing violence. For single mothers with nowhere to go. For children who needed safety. The sign above the door read, "The Marco Romano House, where truth lives among the stars." It had been Elia's idea. A way to honor her father's memory. A way to help other families who were lost and scared and desperate, the way they had been. Sofia cut the ribbon. Elia held the scissors. And Luca stood beside them, one hand on each of their shoulders. The crowd cheered. News cameras filmed. Politicians smiled and took credit. But Luca only cared about 2 people. The woman who had protected her daughter at any cost. And the child who had protected a stranger because it was the right thing to do. That night, back at the estate, Elia gave Luca a new drawing. This one was different from all the others. It showed the same 3 people. The same house. But this time, the little girl wasn't just holding hands with the adults. She was standing in front, arms spread wide, protecting them. The way they protected her. Family, Elia said simply, protects each other. Always. Luca hung the drawing in his office. Right where he could see it every day. A reminder that power wasn't about control or fear or walls that kept people out. Power was about standing between the people you loved and the darkness. Power was about being willing to die for someone, and having them be willing to die for you. Power was about an 8-year-old girl who blocked a mafia boss's path and changed everything. Years later, people would still tell the story. About the little girl who stopped the most feared man in the city with nothing but the truth. About the single mother who risked everything for her daughter. About the mafia boss who learned that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice. They called it a fairy tale. A legend. Something too good to be real. But Luca knew better. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was just what happened when broken people found each other and decided to be whole together. It was what happened when a child's bravery reminded a man what his own heart was for. It was what happened when mercy turned out to be strength after all. And every night, as Luca tucked Elia into bed, he would think about the moment she stepped into his path. How close he had come to dying. How close he had come to ordering her death. How one small act of courage had unraveled an empire of evil and built a family of love. "Thank you," he would whisper, after she fell asleep. "Thank you for saving me. Not from the bomb. From the cold." 5 years passed. Elia was 13 now, smart and strong and still seeing the world with those two wise eyes. But now, when she smiled, the smile reached all the way to her soul. Sofia and Luca had married 2 years ago, a quiet ceremony in the estate gardens with just family. Marco Vale had walked Sofia down the aisle. Elia had been the flower girl and made everyone cry with her toast about found families being the best families. The Marco Romano house had expanded. 3 more shelters opened across the city. Thousands of families found safety because one little girl had believed that protecting strangers was what good people did. And Luca, the man who had built walls around his heart and called it strength, learned that the bravest thing he ever did wasn't surviving his uncle's betrayal or building an empire or facing down his enemies. The bravest thing he ever did was let an 8-year-old girl and her mother inside those walls. Was let himself be saved. On Sunday afternoons, they would sit in the garden together. The 3 of them, reading or talking or just being quiet in the way families do when they're comfortable with each other. And sometimes, Elia would look up at the sky and say, "The truth lives in the stars, Dad." Right where Daddy Marco said it would be. And Luca would pull her close and say, "The truth is right here, sweetheart. With us. Always." Because that was the real truth. Not in coordinates or storage units or evidence that could bring down empires. The truth was simple. Love was stronger than fear. Family was stronger than blood. And sometimes, the person who saves you is the one you least expect. Sometimes, she's 8 years old with dark curly hair and eyes that see straight through to your soul. Sometimes, she blocks your path and everything changes. Sometimes, she reminds you that power means nothing if you use it to stand alone. And sometimes, she teaches you that the greatest strength is being brave enough to let someone in. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that family is chosen, not given. That courage comes in all sizes. And that sometimes, the smallest among us carry the biggest truths. Leave a comment. Have you ever met someone who changed everything? Someone who saw the real you beneath all your armor? Tell us your story. We read every word. And subscribe, because the best stories, the ones about broken people becoming whole, are still waiting for you. Thank you for being here. For listening. For believing that even in darkness, there is light. And sometimes, that light is carried by a child who refuses to let good people die without warning.